Okay, everyone, that's Roger Pulvers. I gather we're live, so I'm just going to kick in the esteemed playwright, or adapter, should I say, not the playwright. That was written by Nicola Gogol of The Government Inspector. And my name is Darren Gilshenan, and I'm the director of The Government Inspector. I'll hand over to Roger, and he can tell you a little bit about himself.
Well, let's hear about you first. You wanted to say something.
Be like that then.
You don't need an introduction, of course.
Well, I think there's plenty of people out there going, who's that crusty old fella? Yeah, look, I'm an ex-NIDA graduate. I'm really excited to be doing this NIDA Live thing. I got out of the factory in 1988.
Right.
And have been a professional actor. And then later on started to direct, and still acting and directing. So this is the 5th production I've directed at NIDA for the 3rd years. They've all been comedies, and I haven't been there for a couple of years because the comedy slot hasn't been in play. There used to be a comedy slot at the beginning of 3rd year.
Oh, right.
It's enjoyable, yes, which all the actors used to get a go. Whereas now it's a little more like I go and teach comedy workshops, and there's like a week at the end of a term, which is a comedy week.
Gee,
however, this production was a joy, and let's get straight into it, Roger. So now Roger wrote this production. Those of you that didn't see it out there, the play normally has a cast of how many in Nicola Gogol's?
Well, at least 19, between 19 and 23, if you have people playing the different actors playing the little bit parts.
Yes.
So I translated the play. It's called Revizor in Russian, written in 1836, or first performed in 1836 by Nikolai Gogol. I translated it and adapted it in 1980 and 81. What happened was I was working at the Playbox Theatre in Melbourne when it was on Exhibition Street as playwright in residence and director as well. And I went to the artistic director and I said I wanted to do The Government Inspector, but he knew the play and knew that it had too many actors for a small theater. It was the equivalent of the Belvoir. So there was the MTC, which was the big one, and we had at the Playbox we had 2 stages, a large one and a small one. And so I said, I want to adapt it. I'll do this for 8 actors. He said, maximum 8 actors. I said, oh, I can do it for 8 actors. So I translated the play and then adapted it for 8 actors going in and out and various people. And I went to him several months later and I said, here it is. And he read, he said, it's very good, but now we can only afford 4 actors. So I said, okay, well, I'll just go back and I'll do it for 4 actors. So I went back to the drawing board and I thought, uh-oh, this is going to happen to me again. So I decided, well, I'm going to do it for 2 actors and make it possible for 2 actors to play all the parts. And it's a play, of course, you know very, very well, which is about identity and who's real and who isn't anyway. So it's very theatrical to incorporate that into the actual dramaturgy of the play. Having said that, with the exception of some flourishes which are put in, like mentions of Dostoevsky, who comes after Gogol, and Dr. Zhivago, which obviously it comes much later than Gogol, the play is very, very faithful to the original. And there are quite a number of translations, none of which I looked at when I was doing it, but I looked at subsequently. And most of them are done by very well-known playwrights in English who don't read Russian. So they're really conglomerations of the various, early translations of The Government Inspector. And that means they're very full of archaic language, which really, in 1836 wasn't archaic language, and very Victorian in style and really hard to pull off. So I wanted to make it both faithful to the original in language, tone, and message, and yet make it contemporary to us at the time in the 20th century, where it had its messages of, well, maybe I am not the person I think I am. And, well, why shouldn't I do? I'll take on the role of that person and see what happens. As we do, we play act. So it becomes sort of, for lack of a better word, and pardon my French, existential in a way, which of course it wasn't in 1836.
And of course, Roger, you speak Japanese as well as Russian, and you translated this initially to be done in Japan with a couple of famous Japanese actors, yeah?
Yes, that's right. So it didn't go on because I left the Playbox when I got the job as assistant director on Oshima Nagisa's film Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, and left Australia in 1982. So I didn't have a chance to do it. It wasn't until 2000 that I did it in Tokyo with two very fantastic award-winning actors, Emoto Akira and Hashizume Isao, both of whom are in lots of films, people who love Japanese films in Australia and elsewhere. I've seen them. And I directed it, and it was just a lot of fun to do. And then John Bell gave me a call in 2006 and said, because I had showed him a copy of the script, and he said he wanted to do it. And I was, of course, thrilled. And I love John. I love him as an actor, but I love him just as much, if not more, as a director. He's just a director of genius. In 1973, I saw his Melbourne Theatre Company production of How Can You Believe Me When, I said I was your valet, but I've been a liar all my life. I said Goldoni's, I messed that up, but Goldoni's play with Drew Forsyth. And it was just, I can remember slapping my knees and choking with laughter. So he directed that.
Yes.
Of course, I was very happy, but I wanted to direct it. So I said, I'd love it, but because I directed the Bell Shakespeare Company in 2000 in Strindberg's Dance of Death at the Adelaide Festival. And John said, no, he wanted to do it. So I gave my baby to him. So that was the first production in English with you as the government inspector and the other role.
What an enjoyable experience.
What about that? Tell us about that from your standpoint. I'd love to hear it. It's down in 2007.
Yeah, Bill Zappa and myself got to play in those roles, which was fantastic. We had a really interesting, it was interesting. Steve Curtis, of course, who's now kind of head of design at NIDA, was our designer on the original production. He had to keep stum while I was having my design meetings with the designers at NIDA on this production. But we were fortunate enough to have a week-long workshop with Stephen in the room where Bill Zappa and I developed all the characters. Because and I followed the same process when I directed this production. It's very difficult, particularly say for student actors, to come up with character quickly. Character is generally something, as an actor, you find that you evolve through a production and you arrive at a character. A character is the sum of their actions, and all your behavior through a rehearsal period, as you develop a piece of theatre, in a way, you become the character. But it's very difficult to start with character. But this piece, which has 19 characters, it's very important, considering the two actors play 4 of the same character at different times. So they both play the wife, and they both play Bob Chinsky. So it's important to get that character work up front. And when we did it, we were in a room a week with Steve and Billy and I, and Bill Zappa is also a disciple of Rudolf Laban. And the 8 efforts of Rudolf Laban: punch, press, flick, dab, slash, ring, glide, float. I use them a lot as an actor to develop character, along with another vocal process as well. But Billy Zappa said, maybe we should use, the Laban efforts as a way to start with the characters so we can get on the same page and have a similar kind of language. And I remember him talking about Bob Chinsky. Actually, the first time he talked about Bob Chinsky, he was doing this voice like this, and he kind of had this.
You should say Bob Chinsky is the head of the postmaster.
The postmaster, head of the post office, and he was doing it in such a way, it was, I don't know, it was so over the top. It was like a really big choice. And I said, no one will ever believe that. And he just kind of got up and stood in front of me and kind of dropped into this character, and kind of his neck went forward and this voice came out of him. He said, don't you think people will believe this? And it was so convincing. I went, wow, awesome. That's like his Bill Zappa is one of the most extraordinary character actors.
Oh, he is. Oh, yeah. Oh, of course, much more than that. But
yeah,
creating a character, I agree. His physical presence on stage is amazing. I think I've worked with him eight on 8 different
Right.
plays. I think I've directed him 8 times.
He's a chameleon.
The joy. He's taught me a great deal. Yeah.
Yes, but we did have that initial production was. We had an extraordinary set, Roger. You might remember it was a giant box, giant packing crate. At the beginning of the show, I'd come out as Petrov and open the packing crate and reveal the little mini set inside, and we would work within that.
Of course.
When we got to Canberra, which was our first port of call, the walls at the end of the show, the walls and the roof of this thing were meant to collapse until the stage was totally bare, kind of symbolizing the breakdown of basically the mayor's life. But the first night they dropped those things, the hinges ripped off them, shards of wood went everywhere, and the whole kind of set completely broke. So they had to build another set the second night we did the show. They never dropped the walls again. But the design process for the NIDA one was very interesting because, the show, one of the things I love about the show, Roger, is not only the opportunity it is for an actor, but the magic in it. There's the magic in the quick change, the deftness of change, and the redirection. There's a lot of what we call the money Lazis, where Klestakov is left on stage, dragging the audience's attention away from the fact that actor Z is out there doing a quick change. And that actor at one stage, actor A, has like 17 quick changes in a row. And I was very interested in the magic. I love theatre being magical, and I think to be in a space and to be able to have surprises is something I always look for in set design. So Adrian, who did the wonderful set design with us, we talked a lot about trapdoors and secret entrances and things like that. And last night we did our final show, and we had that wonderful the clothier Chang makes an entrance in a drawer in a filing cabinet that looks to be that wide, but of course it's a false drawer that goes right out the back of the set. That got a shriek from the audience last night. It did. Excited to see him pop out of a drawer,
Right. The illusion, yeah. So obviously it's a design tour de force, what I saw of the NIDA production. And when you're writing a play or adapting a play, which is the same thing really, especially if you're changing, and I don't mean an adaptation of just setting a Russian play in the Australian outback and changing the accents. That's called an adaptation, but that's very different from an adaptation where you take 19 or 20 odd actors and you compress it into 2. As you're writing it, you have to be sure that this is doable and visualize it, and so that was all part of the adaptation. And then it's the director's job to make sure that, so the mayor goes out and says, well, I just have to go out, and he comes back as his wife, and says, where's my husband or whatever, and you think that he was only off stage for a few seconds. Yeah. Actually, he was off stage longer, but you must create the illusion to the audience, which you did to me, even though I know the play so well, that, my God, he's back already as somebody else. How did he do that? And so you're playing with time. You're designing time. Yes. What a play does, it redesigns time so that for the audience.
Yeah, interesting. You kind of talk about that point, because I remember when we did the Bell Shakespeare version, and I had to do all those money hiding Lazis. A Lazzi, of course, is a commedia dell'arte term, which is like an extended improvisation. We worked out a routine, which was losing the money around the space, which was okay. But after about 3 or 4 versions of that routine, you got used to it. You went, well, I know what's coming. And I was on the bus on the way home thinking, what happens on a stage with actors that's different to when I'm on a stage by myself with these objects? And I thought every relationship that you have during a play with another character evolves. So I thought, can I evolve the relationships with inanimate objects. Actually have a, so therefore I started looking around at the objects and going, well, the lampshade that we hide the money in looks like a woman's bodice or a skirt of sort. And so I would approach that lampshade each time kind of in a polite manner and excuse myself before I put my hand up the skirt to see if the money was there, and then kind of act as though she responded or slapped or liked it or whatever, or didn't. And we did that with like the cigar container, fed my smoking craving, the vodka bottle fed my drinking addiction, we whatever object we had, each time we came back to it. And of course, there's 8 of those Lazzis in a row in the piece. We had to keep I had to keep evolving the relationship. And I found that took the audience's focus enough to make the quick changes seem half as fast.
Oh, good. I see. Sure, it does. Well, that's the directorial genius of what you did. And obviously the audience is watching and is engrossed and doesn't realize how long it's taking. Yeah. I'd just like to go back to something you said about the acting, because you have a character, whether it's Bobchinsky or Dobchinsky or the clothier or the baker or whatever. And you create a character. I mean, there are many ways of creating a character, but when you have to do it very quickly, and it's only for the person is only on stage for a very short time, you've got accent, you've got the physical, the posture, obviously, you've got the costume, which helps you a lot. And my 2 Japanese actors both said, when we were talking about the play later on, they said they only knew what the next character was by looking at, they got, the costume was put on, they said, oh, okay, I'm the baker. Out, you know,
yeah,
sort of that you need you need the costume and you need the physicality in the voice, but you need something else, because these people are not mannequins, they're real people. So when the baker says that the mayor comes and takes his best eclairs and they're talking about thieves, they're talking about the mafia. You know, I live by making eclairs and by making bread. He comes in and he takes my bread. Yeah. It's a real character who has only a very short time to tell the audience, and presumably the inspector couldn't care less about it, obviously, that I really am suffering in it. They say that often, we're really suffering in this town. They say that. So it's got to have that level. Otherwise, it's just a bunch.
Well, that's, you know, that's the themes of the play, isn't it? Greed and corruption.
Yes.
And identity, as you said. And by the way, that baker's eclair, he said, have been sitting on the shelves for 7 months.
That's right, of course.
I don't think he's a very good baker either.
No, of course.
I think they're all corrupt.
Yes, yeah.
That's an interesting thing you raised there, Roger, because when I worked with Lee and Tom, the actors in this production who did such a wonderful job, we discussed a lot about keeping this thing anchored very much in what, you know, Gogol's themes were all about.
Yes.
And this idea that our friend would be the dark side of, you know, of this abused system, and this, you know, narcissistic egomaniac that just wanders in out of nowhere and uses lies and deceit to get what he wants, just seemed like too much of a common parallel for what's going on in the world today.
Absolutely.
And it's something that we really anchored the play down to. I've always believed that with comedy, is that comedy is drama amplified, you know, and you have to find the pain and the truth, but it has to be anchored down. And watching the lads last night doing their final show, there was such a tremendous sense of kind of lightness of touch and departure from the script in little improvised moments, which I encouraged. But whenever they felt as though the characters became the audience was laughing a bit too much at the characters, they'd dig straight into story and go into the stakes and pull that audience right back into the drama, you know, because the drama is, of course, the platform for comedy, you know.
Absolutely. Well, the play, you know, is a very serious commentary on corruption and on authority.
Didn't he, when he first wrote it, because, I mean, it's such a wonderful idea, the fact that he wrote to his mate Pushkin about...
Give me an idea, that's right.
Yeah, for an idea. And Pushkin said, oh, yeah, okay, I'll send you an idea about this government inspector guy, yeah? And then when you look at the play, that kind of meta-theatrical idea of it, that same idea is used within the adaptation, you know, at the end when he writes to his friend Trapkin.
Right, that's right. Yeah, no, that is very, and that's in the original, of course. Yes, Pushkin gave him the idea for Dead Souls as well, his
Yes.
main novel. So he was very close to Pushkin.
And
But
wasn't it the first version or two of Government Inspector didn't have trouble with the censors?
well, no, Nikolai Pirvi, Nicholas the First, who was a vicious autocrat, probably in the, next to Ivan the Terrible, #2, he loved it. And of course, Gogol was a pro-Tsarist, pan-Slavicist, very, very deeply religious person. So while it's very critical of corruption he's by no means a revolutionary in any sense of the word, except, well, I shouldn't say that. He's only revolutionary in his writing, but certainly not in his messages. So it was passed by the censors, and it's become the main, well, one of the 3 or 4 main plays of the Russian repertoire. And as you know, in 1926, Meyerhold, Vsevolod Meyerhold, the famous avant-garde theater director at the Moscow Arts Theatre, who was brutally, some years later, about 12 years later, my memory serves me, was arrested, tortured, and murdered during the purges of the late 30s. He directed it in 1926, and most of his earlier directorial works were rather constructivist and people doing this, and that's what we sort of associate. If you look at the stills, it looks very Cubist and
Brechtian or
well, pre-Brechtian, but very, very, very Russian avant-garde of the early 1920s with Chagall and Archipinko and all these people who were around. But to all, I've of course never seen it, but the reports are, the scholarly reports are, that this was a rather naturalistic version of it, but at least in comparison with the constructivist works earlier on. So I think it set the tone for the Moscow Arts Theatre, because I saw the Moscow Arts Theatre in 1964, which admittedly is 38 years after that, but a long time ago. And their style was very similar. It was naturalistic in the very worst sense of the word, like a bad production of The Old Tote, if people remember that, really bad and very stylized, and so I assume it was something like that, because he was afraid Stalin was just coming into his own in 1926, and I think he was afraid that Stalin, who loved the theater but liked naturalistic theater, wouldn't have approved of the earlier kind of Meyerhold production. So that sort of set the tone. And when this play is done, because it is Russian, because the language is Russian, the characters are very kind of folkloric, it's almost impossible to do this play in a new way in Russia, because it's just so much part of Russian history and costumes and everything. I wanted dearly to do this in Moscow or St. Petersburg or another Russian city. I wanted this adaptation to go on, because I thought the Russians themselves would see that it can be done in a more 20th, now 21st century way. So when Bobchinski, for instance, gives the money to the phony inspector, and the inspector says, well, is there anything else? And he says, yes, just one thing. Would you, when you go back to St. Petersburg, to the capital, and you meet all these famous people, would you just tell them that in a certain town, Ivan Ivanovich Bobchinski lives? And then the inspector says, yeah, sure, yeah, okay. And he says, and if you meet the Tsar, which is, would you please tell him that in a certain little town, Ivan Ivanovich, and those in your production came out very beautifully. And I'd like to, that has to come out as a kind of cry, a cri de coeur, or a cry of, look, I'm a complete nobody. As long as somebody knows that I exist, I'll be happy. To me, that's not only Gogol, because it really is, because his characters in short stories like The Nose and The Overcoat are real nobodies who try to become somebody. And that character comes into the 20th century directly from Gogol, through Dostoevsky maybe, into Camus and Nabokov and all the anti-heroes that we have. I'm sort of lecturing on and on about literature, but it's really important. And so that message has to come through in a production today of The Government Inspector, that these people are made to feel like they're complete nobodies when this figure, who's a complete imposter, comes into their midst. And all they want is that somebody knows that they exist. It's just a, I mean,
yes,
it's going to be a theme for another 100 or 200 years. This play is going to last for a long, long time. Sorry, I went on and on in a kind of creepy way.
It's lovely. It's lovely to hear all about the, your knowledge of play and the styles, of course.
Yeah.
Style is an interesting thing. Of course, this piece is a satirical farce, and one of the joys. I love farce as an art form. I love commedia dell'arte. I did a production of The Servant of Two Masters with the Bell Shakespeare Company for about 250 performances around the country. Wow. And I was lucky enough to receive a Helpman Award for that some years ago. And thus began my real love of physical comedy in that way. And since then, I've studied a lot of the forms, whether it's white farce or, black comedy or melodrama. There's many, many different forms of comedy. One of the joys of working on a production like this is teaching young actors about how to work farce, and farce is something that needs to be rehearsed very slowly with maximum amount of detail.
Right.
And then once all that detail is in place, which is all comes from character and story. So they're not just arbitrary gags thrown in, but they're really all integral to the actual story and the character's point of view. Then as we get close to the end of rehearsals, once all that stuff's solid, then we just start to crunch time. And as we got to our last week in rehearsal, I think we had about 4 or 5 runs in rehearsal. And I'd say to the boys, okay, we'll take 5 minutes off it this run. And we managed to take 15 minutes off it from the Monday to the Friday of that final week. Now, the play was possibly running about an hour 50, and then we got it down to an hour 30. Hour 33 was the shortest we did. But you can only do that when the mechanics of it are very solid. And I learned this lesson from Richard Cottrell, a theatre director who I did Loot with some years ago at Sydney Theatre Company. It's a brilliant way to work because it allows. It's very mechanical in a way, and very technical. And I said this to the actors: you're not going to feel a sense of knowing what this is for a while. It's going to feel like a mathematical equation. I was fortunate enough to have the designer in the room, the sound designer in the room from the start, Nikki. And so we built like 120 sound cues through the actual plot of the piece, where we'd go, if he ran from here to the couch, wouldn't it be cool if there was like the sound of a car just zooming by with a skid mark at the end, just as he lands on the couch? Oh, so right. we developed all this detail in an oral sense and a visual sense based on character and story, of course. Of course, the 3 things we have as performers is we have our tonality, we have our physicality, and we have our intellect, which is the lines that come out. I often mention this. Albert Moravian in 1965 created a pie chart for human expression saying 58% of our communication is physicality, 38% is tonality, and 7%, I've slightly got those numbers wrong, but 7% is the words. And as Shakespeare said, words are a wily mistress. So I always see, particularly comedy, that there's 93% of the material which is underneath the text. The great thing about your play, Roger, is it has like good comedy, very short lines that just go bang, 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 bang. And the rhythms are tight, When a monologue comes into play, there's reason for it, but the mechanics of putting this thing together for the actors as student actors was exhausting. And
it's amazingly exhausting, but you gave them all the right hints and all the right.
Yes, but they almost had a breakdown a couple of times because of I kept saying to them, you'll just have to trust me. And then when all of this detail, there was so much detail thrown at them, and so I was so prescriptive with them. But then to watch the run. They only got to do, I think, like about 8 performances or whatever, and seeing it from final night to last night was just such a joy to see them take ownership of that style, of that heightened style of farce,
And
which is one thing that unfortunately doesn't get taught a lot. And I teach a lot of comedy masterclasses where I teach these forms. But even in drama schools, the more older traditions, the more theatrical traditions of comedy aren't really taught as much, And
why don't they still have that? I mean, really, but Australians, I'm an Australian, we love comedy.
Yes.
I mean, and we're good at it.
Yes.
Probably better than we are at anything else,
Look, I can only think it's because, the modern direction of the actor, there's a lot of film and TV work out there. That didn't really exist when I went to NIDA 35 years ago. There were some people going over to America, but they'd disappear and you'd never see them again. There certainly wasn't that, continuous, now we can all make self-tapes and audition for every second American Marvel film, as we're all doing. And then they're making them all out here all the time. So I think that generally actors have been required to kind of go into those forms. But some of the older traditional comedy forms like melodrama, which is all about emotions. It's all about embracing heightened emotion, and farce, which is all about crunching time and exaggerating drama. Black comedy, which is about trying to get the audience to kind of put their hand over their mouth in horror rather than laugh out loud. Martin McDonagh does that so well in his plays. And yes, I think theatrical training, really, all actors should have an opportunity to train in that. And last night when I was debriefing with Tom and Lee afterwards, they were saying how not only did they learn a lot about farce, but by working in these heightened styles, they found they could get more ownership about their choice as an actor. Because I always say to them, it's okay to be OTT. It's okay to be over the top, as long as you got a bottom. As long as we know why you did that. And of course, comic characters have a desperate desire to win. They don't see defeat. And it's only their behavior that makes us laugh at them, because they do outrageous things in order to get that win. So it's reminding actors that choice can be big and imaginative and fun, and not always reducing things, because I think our job as actors is to explore these the human experience.
Yes. Oh, that's absolutely brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. And what I got out of your production, and what really has to happen to make this play work, is that every character has to have a distinct verbal personality. And that doesn't mean just an accent or a funny voice, because anybody, I'm not an actor, so I can't do it, but any actor, even bad actors, can do that and get a laugh out of it or something. But it has to have a real personality, a real character. You see through the accent, nuance, depth. So, and that came through, and that, if that doesn't come through, the play doesn't work. Then why have all those people play? It's not just a show of actors. And if you look at, actually, one of the books I wrote, one of the 30 books I wrote in Japanese, was a book about American Jewish entertainers and actors in the United States in the 20th century. And of course, I covered the comedians very, very. One of my hobbies is Jewish humor and the American comedians. And what you remember all the way from Fanny Brice through to Jack Benny, Milton Berle, Jerry Lewis, had a funny voice, and all the way up to Woody Allen and Sarah Silverman and the people now, what they have in common, they have a distinct voice. It's not just doing this and telling a joke with a Myron Cohen, like with an accent that everybody sort of starts getting ready to laugh when they hear it. But they all have a distinct voice, and that voice is their personality. And if I were a comic actor, an actor who wanted to do comedy, I would study these people, as well as Roy Reen and the Australians as well, George Wallace, and so I would get a distinctive voice which I could use as the bottom, the base, to create all these characters. That's not that's easier said than done, isn't it? I mean,
Well, yeah.
I think what you gave those two young actors was not only the physical means to sort of tighten up the screws and make it get it done economically and concisely and with an impact, but the voice. I thought their voice control was very good, and I'm sure there was a lot of your work in there as well.
Yes, and also like a lot of help from Simon, head of voice, and Lee,
Right.
The voice course there. They did a lot of work with the guys, I just laid the groundwork. I worked with the process from the late, great Rowena Baylos. It's called
yes, I remember her. Yes.
Voice resonators, which starts with resonating sound from 9 places, from your stomach to your chest, to your throat, to your jaw, to your nose,
Right.
cheeks, eyes, forehead, and top of head. And the phrase goes, all of art must learn, then take his ease. And it's about moving pitch and vibration.
Right.
And your tongue that starts very flat in your mouth. If you take the all of art must learn, then take his ease, which is a great little philosophy of
Yes.
what we must do as actors. You know, when we walk on stage, we don't show our homework. But if you do it for vowel sounds, you're left with o, e. And what happens is the tongue goes from there to there. So it drags sound naturally out of you.
Right.
So we started with the boys with Laban efforts.
Oh, good.
A punch character, but we did vocal placement in the chest, or a punch character, vocal placement in the jaw. And it gave us an anchor point. And I think as an actor, if you are multi-character playing, this is good for anyone who does animation. If you've got a couple of processes that you can just anchor characters down, it's really easy to suddenly go back and pick them up. And something also happens if you're in a long run of a show, maybe you're doing 150 shows, characters can drift a bit. Whereas if you've got anchor points in your physical process, your vocal process, and then what you're talking about, Roger, I think the idea of voice being of particular types. I always say to the guys, when you tap into someone who you go, that guy sounds a bit like this. So, for instance, Nikolai, the judge in our production, was very much God save the Queen, because God, I can't remember his bloody name at the moment. Gough Whitlam.
Not Jepka. No, he's the doctor.
No,
I changed some of the names from the
judge was Gough Whitlam's voice.
Oh, was he?
Once we found that voice, fellow Australians.
Right.
It was, we could watch the videos and study and go, right, that's the voice once you found the anchor point. But, creatively, I think everyone comes at work differently. The thing, there's a question here that I've got to answer.
Oh, right. The question. I'll put on my glasses so I can read it.
But one of the things I think about this piece, Roger, just pulling it back to the piece, is it's so much is required of the actor. So much, particularly for actor A, who has to play 14 characters. It's extraordinary. It's an extraordinary thing to have to do,
Well, you pulled it off. So I can see this question on my screen. This is one for you. So you read the question.
Okay. Could you discuss the mechanics of making something repetitive, like hiding the money, building humor rather than feeling repetitive? Yeah, well, I think I kind of started to answer that before. In our production that we just did at NIDA, I think Tom's very good at improvising, and I gave him quite a long leash within those money latsies to jam with the audience in a way. So each night he would kind of move things in slightly different directions. As the latsie built, initially the money gets hidden behind a cushion, then it gets hidden behind a tape deck, and then of course the next latsie goes to the cushion, it's not there, it goes to the tape deck, it's there, then it gets hidden, and he moves his way around. There's 8 of them anyway, but I allowed Tom to feel as though each time he moved around, he could go about it, attack it in a different kind of way, and he really, in a very short period of time, really developed a lovely rapport with the audience, where he'd say to the audience, surely not, it's not there, is it? And it would be a little bit panto. It was a bit like, he's behind you.
Yeah, that's right. If there were children there, they would say it's under the cushion. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Oh, actually, something wonderful happened last night, and I was talking with Lee about it. As the mayor at the end, when Kolesnikov leaves and has robbed him, and he doesn't know it, and the mayor thinks his life's going to suddenly become brilliant because he's marrying his daughter off to someone famous. I encourage Lee, in order to allow Tom to do his quick change, to riff on like a song that was like, I'm going to Petersburg or whatever. And it said it should be like a show tune. So he started going, I'm going to Petersburg, I'm going to Petersburg. And he's saying this song, it's very silly. And then he stops and looks at the audience and moves on with a bit of the monologue. And then he started going across the stage and went, I'm going to, and just pointed at the audience, and the whole audience went, Petersburg.
Oh, really?
I said to him afterwards, the wonderful thing about watching you guys finally grasp what I call freaking out within the form.
Yeah.
I said that moment, did you plan that moment? Did you plan to see if you could get a call and response from the audience? He said, no, it just came to him in that moment. And I said, well, that's it, mate. That's where comedy should always be played. Yes. Comedy has to be live. I say it's the space between you and me. It's not in me or it's not in you. It's what movement is happening between us, yes. Emotionally, ideas, nuance, physicality. And that same little movement is going between us and the audience. It's like a triangle. You've got the actors here and here and the audience here. And the space between is live. And of course, comedy is incredibly mathematical and it's a bit like a musical score. But the way in which we perform it is anarchy with inside it. And I'll leave you maybe with this before I'll throw over to you, Rog, is that the word comedy actually comes from the Latin word comus, which was an ancient festival, the Comus festival, where they used to ritualistically disembowel sheep, get their stomachs, turn them inside out and put all the blood and offal and crap inside the stomach linings of the sheep and tie them to themselves like big breasts and phalluses. And then they'd get really drunk and they'd charge each other in the town square, and running into each other like those sumo wrestler suits we see people dress in, yes. And trying to explode these skins and get covered in blood and shit. So that's where comedy came from, or the idea of comedy came from. And I think within that, inherent within that, is we have a skin, which is societal behavior. And inside it, we have life, we have the heartbeat, we have the anarchist, we have the clown that wants to venture into the audience and smash through the fourth wall. And the great tension of comedy is to have this anarchy trapped by this societal, you can't do that. And you've always got to ask yourself, within that, there's some kind of tension. Right. And that's what we always find. And I'm sure you do as a playwright as well, when you're looking at works, when you're putting things together, is where is the tension within a scene? Yeah? Oh
yeah, that's right. Yeah, but not with sheep stomachs, but boy, I'd never heard that before. That's amazing. But talking about the fourth wall, this play, Gogol, the government inspector, in this play, Gogol breaches the fourth wall at the very end, a little speech. He says, what are you laughing at? You're laughing at yourselves. I want to wring your necks and put you in the oven. That's all translated very faithfully from the original. That's amazing, because when I saw many, many years ago, Insulting the Audience, I think, did Peter Handke write that? I think he did. I was quite shocked by that, that when an actor looked at us and said, what are you laughing at? You coughers, you idiots, you ticket buyers, and so on. And yeah, it comes from there. So, I mean, there's great innovation in this as well.
Yes.
But going back to voice, I just have to say, I first realized it in 1964. I had the opportunity, it's a long time ago, to see Richard Burton's Hamlet, directed by Gielgud, on Broadway. Wow. My uncle bought me a ticket in the front row. And I didn't know much about Shakespeare, and I don't think I really understood the play, but he was mesmerizing. And what I remember from seeing him literally about a meter and a half away, so I could see the spit coming out of his mouth, was his voice. And I thought, my God, that's the first time I thought acting is talking. I mean, obviously it's moving around too, but. And then in '66, in October, I went to Wrocław in Poland, where I was doing postgraduate work, and I went to Jerzy Grotowski's theater laboratorium when he was still there in the small city in southern Poland. and saw his Constant Prince with Richard Czeslak. And Richard Czeslak was one of the great actors of the world. Turned a very tragic story. People can look it up and find out about it. His voice was a muscle, and his voice was a physical gesture. And I went out of there, and what happened was, very briefly, I sat in the seat and I couldn't get out of my seat. And Grotowski came up to me and said, I speak Polish, and he said to me, "Are you all right?" I said, I'm just so overwhelmed by this. And I ran to the station. I missed my train to Warsaw, and it was cold. It was the middle of October 1966 in Poland. And I was on the bench all night long, freezing to death because of this guy's voice. But I realized that you can hurt someone with a voice almost worse than you can with your fists. And when I directed Dance of Death, Strindberg's Dance of Death, which I did a couple of productions of, both in Melbourne and with John Bell and Anna Boska and Bill Zappa as well in 2000, which we took to Japan, that production in Japan, I realized Strindberg understands that well. You can hurt somebody with a few words. I mean, we know that from watching the dramas we watch. And your work, and so what you said about where the voice comes from, all of that is absolutely true, and it's technical, but it's like, even if you can do all of that well, it's like drawing and somebody says, "Oh, that really looks like my Uncle Fred," but that doesn't make it art. There's something below there, which is genius or talent or gift or whatever you want to, the muse, whatever you want to call it, or your own personality, which infuses into those techniques something that just takes it that much farther, that much deeper, that much higher. And that's what I saw in your own work as the inspector, and also coming to be there. Not yet, the guys are too young for that, but I thought you really imparted something very important to them.
Well, thank you very much, Roger. That's a lovely thing to say. And we might, on that note, finish up.
Okay.
Lovely chatting with you, mate.
Okay.
We will
take care, keep your distance, and hopefully, you will see this play on somewhere else with you.
Well, it's a perfect COVID play, isn't it, really? It's only got 2 actors in it.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone out there in internet land.